All right, hello to everyone, and thank you so much for joining our Design Controls webinar today. We are Qualio, the first cloud QMS for the entire life sciences ecosystem, whether you're med device, therapeutics, CRO, or otherwise. We have a product that will support you and help you bring products to market. Our mission is to enable teams to launch and scale life-saving products. That's both an ambitious and simple mission. My name is Patrick Krieger. I'm on the product marketing team. I live in New York City, and I've worked very closely with Richard, the co-host today, to bring design controls to market. And so I will let Richard introduce himself.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, my name is Richard Warren. I'm the product manager based in London, UK. I'm focused on design controls, which is our newest feature that I'm excited to show you today.
Awesome. Before we jump into the design controls demo, I just want to give everyone an overview of Qualio's product, which is our EQMS. We have an all-in-one and purpose-built EQMS, which means that we enable your team with documents, training, events, and more, including design controls, which we will demo today. We are built in FDA and ISO best practices, so you can ensure that we meet regulatory standards. And we can offer you expert advice and support. We've got an incredible quality team with decades of experience building this product. Qualio's value propositions are that we're easy. We're a very easy to use solution, simple to implement across your team. We're scalable, so we can grow with you as many employees as you have as your company grows over time. And we're trusted, so we're audit ready and time tested for your team. And that is our overall offering, our EQMS. And today we will be digging into design controls specifically. So before we begin, there's just one housekeeping slide. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. And you can find the Q&A button in your Zoom window at the bottom. You'll see it says Q&A with two bubbles around it. So we prefer that you put your questions in the Q&A section versus the chat, so that we can see those questions and we'll answer them at the end. If we are not able to get to your questions within the allotted time, we can follow up with you by email if your email is associated with your question. So today's agenda is three-pronged. The first part of our webinar today will look at product development challenges that we've learned from talking to customers and prospects over the entire time that Qualio has existed, and especially during the time we were developing design controls. The first thing we heard from customers is that siloed tools and processes are extremely challenging for their teams as they build products. The second is that a lack of traceability across those tools makes nesting your requirements, needs, validation and verification very complicated. And finally, compiling all of your information into documentation that enables a product release is tedious, burdensome, and time-consuming. And so today, we will dig deeper into those challenges and how design controls solves for those. That will be our solution deep dive. And then the final part is our Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So just want to give you a little insight to what we've been seeing in terms of the state of the industry, particularly around design controls. So driven by the urgency of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing radical medical innovation. This has resulted in increased access to funding and expanded collaboration between public and private sectors. So we're seeing speed to market has never been so important. We see that product development teams are working together to create their product, whether this is a software product, a medical device, or combination. Typically, quality works alongside these teams, but is siloed in their systems and their processes. Quality teams have to manually collate the information they need from the product teams, figuring out what they need to be compliant. They don't want to validate all those systems. There shouldn't be the need. They just want their QMS to be the place where they can manage this and be compliant. However, in many cases, design controls are being retrofitted as an administrative task rather than recording the design history and formalizing the traceability matrix from the beginning. This is a double hit of slowing the velocity of the release to market and missing out on the benefit of better outcomes that are inherently provided through a controlled design process. Through the ongoing digital transformation of the industry and new companies who are shifting the mindset from compliance equaling quality, we're seeing quality being viewed as a commercial advantage and the new principles of quality beyond compliance. So here at Qualio, we too believe that quality shouldn't act like an opposing force to your product development velocity. And so we've built design controls to address some of the fundamental issues we see today in the industry.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. So right now we're going to launch a poll in the webinar, and the poll relates to the 3 challenges that we presented at the top and that Richard also just discussed in the state of the industry. You're able to answer the question now. So it should pop up in your screen. And the question is, of the options below, which is your team's biggest challenge in your product development process? I will be sharing the results, so I think you'll be able to see it in your screen. Actually, the breakdown is incredibly even in a way. 30% voted for siloed tools and processes, 30% voted for lack of traceability across systems, and then 40% voted for manual documentation. And so all of you will be very happy with what we have to demonstrate to you today, because design controls is built specifically to address these 3 challenges. And so we can now launch into our design controls demo. And thank you so much for participating in the poll. Awesome. So within the demo, we'll present the challenge and solution that design controls provides to customers. And the first challenge that we built design controls to address is that engineering and quality teams are siloed by their tools and processes. So historically, we've seen that these teams operate in different systems and tools. Maybe your engineering team loves Jira and your quality team exists in Qualio. And those systems don't necessarily talk to each other. And so that causes friction and delays in product development. And so with Qualio's design controls, we've built a solution that unites all of your systems in one place using APIs. So here you can see that we have Jira, TestRails, Azure DevOps, and additional integrations that allow your team to stream artifacts from multiple systems directly to Qualio. And Richard will demonstrate that now.
Thanks, Patrick. So actually, in a break with tradition, I'm going to actually show someone else's product before we go into Qualio. The reason, because this is typically where the design process starts. So we're picking up on an SAMD scenario here. So a software as a medical device, the CardioSync app. So here we're in Jira. So this is a tool that's typically used by software developers. It's not the only tool out there, but it seems to be the prevalent one. And in fact, we ourselves use Jira to manage the development of Qualio. So here I am with an epic or a user need for about login. I've got some details around that, and I've got some linked items. So some detailed requirements for that and a test case. So as you can see, there's lots of information here that the development team would use to manage the development of that process, the iterations, the sprints they might do to create the product. So now we move over to Qualio. So we have the same concept of products. So we have our CardioSync app here. We can have multiple products, each with their own configuration. And we're going to go to requirements. So because we've connected to Jira, we're automatically streaming in all the relevant data. We can see the same requirements, but just the key information we need. So we can get rid of the noise and we can focus in on things that are important for us to maintain the design controls and be compliant. So again, we see the same requirement, we see the same test cases, and we can drill down further and we see all within context of this particular product. We can click here on the view more, and we can go back into Jira and drill down if we need to see more detail. Furthermore, we recognize that tools such as Jira are not used by everyone, particularly when developing physical devices. You may have multiple products, physical device, software, or a combination of both, with different tools being used as needed. We have you covered there too. So we're going to have multiple products, as I said before, each with their own configuration. So if I switch over here, we have a tertiary infusion smart pump, which is a physical device. And in the same way, we have the requirements, in this case, user needs, design inputs, design outputs, and verification tests, all shown in context, built out automatically as the source items are created. And in this case, I can click through and we can see here the source of this is actually a Qualio doc. So this gives us clear traceability. Irrespective of where the requirements and product development happens, it is always available within Qualio for the quality team to be in lockstep with their product development counterparts. So let's move on to the next challenge.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. So the next challenge, which ate up 30% of your poll responses, was that maintaining end-to-end traceability, particularly with siloed teams, is burdensome. And actually, this is part of the reason that design controls is one of the top reasons for FDA citations. The observations range from not having procedures to not performing or documenting risk analysis or software validation. And so with design controls, we now enable your team to maintain traceability across systems in real time. And within design controls, you can link risks directly to their sources and then compile that information into trace matrices automatically. And Richard will then demonstrate now how that is done within design controls.
I certainly will. Thank you, Patrick. So as Patrick mentioned, we want you to work seamlessly with the tools relevant for the job and the development process. So we're going to start with one of the key elements of design controls, with risk analysis. So the risks can be managed in context with support for the gold standard for risk, which is ISO 14971, and also optionally FMEA. So we give clear guidance based on your own policies to ensure compliance all the way. So if we open existing risk here, we can see the form you're presented with, and you can essentially start to fill out that risk assessment following the standard procedure. One of the key elements of Qualio Design Controls is that we can dynamically link to other design elements. So here, for example, we have a source of the risk, which is user need. We can add multiple sources, and this is dynamically picking up on the design elements that we are streaming in from the source systems. And we can quickly search through and link that to any level of our requirements. So a user need, design input, or a design output, or an epic or a user story as brought in from Jira. We can fill out our assessment and fill out all the required fields. The probability and severity all can be configured to align with your policy. And here we can see we currently have it set as risk level as low. If I increase that, increases to medium, and we've set a trigger, again, based on your own policy, to say this now needs a mitigation, where we can fill out the mitigation information. And more importantly, we can also link to the control items that mitigate this particular risk. So this may, for instance, may be a design input that we want to identify as being there for risk mitigation. So as we are streaming the information in and doing our risk assessments and our dashboards, we get a dynamic view of what's new and what's being changed. So here we see the risk that we were just looking at. If I select that, in context here, I can see all the information about the key information about that. I can see that the source is the user need. I can also see the review history for this particular item. So this, in this case, DC5, it has been previously approved and now has been subsequently changed. And so it needs to go through another change control process. If I pick a design input here, we can see further the trace model showing us the child items for this particular requirement and its parent. And again, the change history for this. So as a quality person, without having to go and search for or speak to anyone, I can automatically see all the items that are changing and being updated in relation to design controls. From here, I can start a review, which will lead on to our next challenge. But essentially we can do change control right from this dashboard and approve these with Part 11 e-signatures.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard, for the demo. So the final challenge that we built design controls to solve was the most popular challenge for participants of the webinar. Over 40% of you said that manually collating and copying information from multiple sources into spreadsheets is your biggest challenge within design controls. And so these paper-based processes for your team require manual governance, intervention, And that makes things very laborious and potentially error prone for your team. The result is then traceability matrices that are hard to maintain and hard to use. And with Qualio's design controls, we are able to generate release documentation like those traceability matrices with one click. And it will compile your information from all linked systems and Qualio into one easily downloadable traceability matrix and more. And Richard will demonstrate.
Thanks, Patrick. So on the approval every change control, we automatically generate key reports, including trace matrices, requirements, and documentation. So I'm going to go back to my risk that I mentioned before, and I pointed out that there was a change control that had been approved. So we're going to go and take a look at that. So we keep a record of every single change control, and as you can see here, we can see all the items that were included within that change control. This is a record of exactly what it was at the time of the approval. So we have a complete history of what was included. We can see who the approver was when they approved it. Again, remind you that was a Part 11 compliant e-signature. We can see other relevant documents that have been associated with this particular change control. So that could be a standard operating procedure or maybe a change assessment. In terms of the automatically generated reports, these include requirements trace matrix. So I'll open that here. So I think 40% of you were saying that the manual creation of the documentation was one of your biggest pains. So hopefully this is something that you like to see. So we're automatically creating these trace matrices every step of the way. So you can completely go back to the beginning when your trace matrix was very basic, right through to when you're ready for submission with a fully completed trace matrix. We also include your risk analysis, much the same way as the trace matrix. And we also compile your requirements into documentation. So for example, our user needs are also included in documentation ready for submission. So just to repeat, all these reports are generated for each approved change. We always have the latest information to hand, as well as the history of every approval and the corresponding reports throughout the design lifecycle of the product.
Awesome, thank you, Richard. That concludes the demo portion of our design controls webinar. However, during the Q&A, Richard may dive back into the demo environment. Right now, we just want to recap what design controls solves for your team. So the first thing is that design controls now unites your systems and your data to enable effective collaboration across your teams, whether that's engineering, product, quality, etc. You can see here in the graph that we have Atlassian, Jira, Qualio, all linked here within design controls. And we're very excited to bring that capability to quality teams across the world.
So the second one was around maintaining the end-to-end traceability across systems in real time. So as we saw, we had full risk analysis capability in there that allowed you to link through to your design elements. Design elements were all being automatically streamed in, maintaining the hierarchy of requirements, giving you a clear oversight to each of those items and its relationship to other key design elements. And all this done in real time without you having to lift a finger.
Perfect. And our final solution here with design controls is that you can generate release documentation with one single click. And that was the biggest pain point attendees identified in our poll. And we're very excited to bring that to you. And here in the screenshot, you can see what Richard demoed: the trace matrix, risk analysis, user needs, and more. All of these documents automatically created and create a snapshot of your product at a moment in time. Finally, if you'd like to schedule a demo of Qualio's EQMS, which would include not only design controls, which we showed you today, but our other features like documents, training, reporting, events, you can go to qualio.com/demo, and our sales team will be in touch with you to schedule a demo shortly. Now we can launch into the Q&A part of our webinar. We already have questions rolling in. Just as a reminder, if you click the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, you can type your question there. We will work to get to all questions with the time remaining. And if we do not Your question is associated with an email address, and we'll work hard to follow up with you right after the webinar. Awesome. So, Richard, for generated reports like the trace matrix, will we be able to review what the report was at a specific historical date? This is important for auditing of the design control.
Yeah, so every time you do the change control, you will get a snapshot of those reports. So essentially you'd have one going right back to the first approval that you did right up to the latest one, and they're all maintained.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And then we've gotten some questions about the risk section. So can we edit fields in the risk documentation? For example, I don't think we saw anything for normal versus fault conditions or risk benefit analysis. How editable are the fields in the risk documentation section?
So currently they are as you saw them, but we are looking at adding more fields into that. The FMEA, which I didn't show you, which I'll quickly dip into now. So you'll see the fields that are included in there. So again, we're following the standards and best practice for these. So most of these fields should map pretty directly to how you're using them, but we are open to input into additional fields that may be needed, and looking at configurability in the future. But mostly at the moment, these fields are as you see them. The configurability is within the risk scale and the labeling of that.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And then in order to use design controls, risk, et cetera, do you have to be using Jira or some other tool, or is there a way that you can just use Qualio natively?
You can use Qualio natively, yes. So that's one of the examples I was showing. So typically what we're seeing for a lot of device companies, we're using things like Google Docs or just spreadsheets to manage their requirements. Qualio Docs is actually quite a good replacement for that, and gives you dynamic linking between the items to build your hierarchy just using Qualio.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And then another question came in. So how customizable are requirements and risk modules? So I think possibly, how do we set up those requirements, hierarchies, et cetera, for our customers?
So highly configurable, actually, the way we can do them. So in terms of the requirements, we can map to any structure. We currently have 3 levels of requirement. We see that as the sweet spot for the things you need to remain compliant. But essentially, they can be mapped to any level of requirement you wish. In terms of the numbering, the naming, that's all configurable. And we're seeing quite a lot of variation in our customers that are using it now.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And another question came in about exported documents. So are the exported documents in Microsoft Excel and Word, and are they locked for further editing once you export?
So not currently. So, well, sorry, I'll answer the first question first. So as you saw, some of them are Excel, so Microsoft Excel documents. The others are Qualio docs. So the Qualio docs are controlled because they're in our QMS system. The spreadsheets are not editable in place. You can download and then modify those and use those. But as you see, they are fixed records within Qualio itself.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And this question is another question about the risk assessment module. So can the risk assessment be used for processes outside of design controls, like linking to other documents in Qualio?
Not currently, but we have heard the same thing. So doing risk assessment on processes and that sort of thing. So yes, we hear you. There is a risk capability in other areas of Qualio, but what you saw today was very much focused on design controls only.
And within risk, you are able to link risks to sources like documents that exist in Qualio, but
that are specific to the product to the product you're in. Yes.
Right. Yep. Perfect. Thank you, Richard. And then this is related to our Jira integration. So does Qualio generate unique ID for requirements, or do we use Jira ID for the requirements for traceability?
I think that might have been someone who spotted that in the demo. So you may have noticed if you were eagle-eyed that the IDs in Jira were different to the IDs in Qualio. So that was intentional. That's basically a feature of Qualio, and we can actually do both. So again, it's part of the choice you have when we configure design controls. We can inherit the ID from the source system, or if there isn't one in place, we can actually use have design controls provide a unique identifier for it. Typically, we see it inheriting from the source system. So typically, if it's Jira, we will just inherit the ID, and the same for Qualio Docs. But we can choose which one we want to use.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And then I'm receiving some questions from current customers on adding this to their accounts. And so if you are a current customer interested in design controls, you can reach out to your customer success manager who will help you enable design controls for your account. So if you are a current customer, again, please reach out to your customer success manager for more information about adding design controls to your account. And Richard, there's another question from the risk assessment. So it's around adding detectability in the current risk assessment.
Okay, so in terms of detectability, we're covering that under the FMEA section. So we've tried to stay true to the ISO 14971 standard and remained only with the two measures and left that detectability into the FMEA section. Both can be used together. So you do have a choice to actually have both types of assessment running within your product.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. And we just received a question about change control. So is design controls able to independently capture changes to the design, or does it need to coordinate with the document change control and events?
So we work independently of that. So we actually treat, and I assume they're referring to Qualio Docs in this sense. So even with Qualio Docs, we see that as a source in the same way that we would see Jira or Azure DevOps. And they have their own process for managing the content and the detail. We are also agnostic from that. So we read in the documentation and the data, and actually I'll show you to demonstrate what I mean by this. So if I go to my dashboard, I can see the status here, and this is being brought in from the source system. So as a quality person, I can see here the maturity of that particular item and whether that's actually ready to go into a change control. So for instance, this item is at draft status, or maybe I don't want to do that yet. And we have our design controls separate of this. So at the moment, we've intentionally kept those separate so the people working on the designs can work independently of the quality and vice versa.
Awesome, thank you, Richard. And then I'm just mindful of time, so we can have this be our last question. But again, if you've submitted a question associated with your email, we will answer that question by email by the end of the week. And we thank all of you for your engagement and all of your questions during this webinar. You have been an incredibly engaged crowd, and we couldn't be more excited. One of the last questions here, Richard, is what other connections have been developed if teams don't use Jira?
So we have Azure DevOps. We have some tools into test systems like test rails, and we have some other sort of on the backlog ready to go. So we know that GitHub is a popular tool, so we'll be likely adding that. Essentially, we've built a framework that allows us to add integrations fairly quickly, and that's really being driven by demand. So if there's a particular tool you're looking to integrate with, then please do reach out to your CS people, and they will inform us, and we'll add that to the list.
Fantastic. So we want to thank everyone again for joining the webinar today. We will follow up with answers to your questions via email if you submitted a question tagged with your email. We will also be sending the recording to everybody. So if you missed this or want to review the information, we will be sending that out by the end of the day. We really, really appreciate your participation and your attendance, and we can't wait for you to start using design controls. And again, if you want to schedule a demo with our sales team, if you're a prospect, you can schedule a demo at qualio.com/demo. Thank you all.